Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to understanding the complex world around us. You don't need us to tell you that global fossil fuel markets are, well, a relentless roller coaster. One minute, things seem relatively calm. The next, a ripple of geopolitical instability or maybe a supply chain snag sends prices just skyrocketing. We've all felt it, right?
Yeah.
At the gas pump or when that electricity bill lands.
Absolutely. It's been impossible to ignore.
But here's the crucial question facing us. As the world races towards renewable energy and, these really ambitious emission reduction targets, how do we build the energy trading systems for this new clean economy? How do we make them truly resilient and equitable?
Exactly. That's the core challenge.
We absolutely cannot afford to swap one set of vulnerabilities from fossil fuels for another in our sustainable future. That just doesn't make sense.
No, it would defeat the purpose in many ways.
That's why today we're diving into a really groundbreaking study. It's titled Geopolitical Risk Index for Guiding International Sustainable Energy Trade. This research offers a powerful quantitative tool, one designed to assess these very risks, giving us, hopefully, a clearer roadmap for smarter, more secure decisions.
Yeah, moving beyond just gut feelings.
Right. Our mission for you today is to give you a quick, digestible understanding of this innovative approach. We want to help you grasp the surprising, maybe vital connections between global stability and your future energy security. So let's jump in.
Great. And the need for a framework like this has never been more apparent. Those instabilities and disruptions in fossil fuel markets you just mentioned, they're a stark, often painful reminder of our current energy vulnerabilities.
Yeah, very painful.
So as we transition, the goal isn't just like switching energy sources. It's about a fundamental redesign of how we trade energy, building structures that are genuinely more robust.
Right. Stronger foundations.
Think back to recent events, the 2022 invasion of Ukraine or the escalating conflicts in the Middle East. These weren't just distant headlines. They directly triggered significant energy price shocks.
Oh, yeah. Definitely felt those.
And for major energy importers, like many countries in the European Union, these events really laid bare some deep weaknesses in their supply chains. So this study, it pushes us to learn from those lessons, to avoid replicating those vulnerabilities as we build out our sustainable energy future.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. When this study talks about geopolitical risk, what exactly are we referring to? Specifically in the context of energy, it sounds like it's more defined than just a general feeling of global tension.
It is. It's quite specific and multifaceted. So the general definition of geopolitical risk, or GPR, broadly refers to the risk associated with war threat, terrorist attacks, and other escalated events that can influence international relations. Pretty broad.
Okay.
But for energy supply and trade, it really hones in on disruptions of energy infrastructure and transportation of energy carriers due to conflicts, political instabilities, and sabotage. So much more focused on the physical movement and infrastructure.
I see. The actual pipes and ships and things.
Yeah. Exactly. And what's truly significant about this study is why it's so important now. Historically, discussions of GPR and energy, they've largely been qualitative, based on expert opinions or maybe general assessments.
Right. More descriptive.
Yeah. This research addresses a critical gap by developing a standardized, country-specific GPR index. And crucially, it's designed to be integrated directly into quantitative models, like energy trade models.
Oh, so it plugs into the numbers.
Precisely. It moves us from those general discussions to measurable, actionable insights. It's a really novel approach compared to how GPR and energy has been treated before.
Okay, we've set the stage with the problem, why this is needed. So how exactly did this study move from that theory to a concrete quantitative tool? What were the essential ingredients for building this geopolitical risk index?
Well, it was a very structured, multi-step process. First, the researchers did an extensive review of existing literature and keyword research, basically trying to identify all potential indices that could possibly feed into a GPR measurement.
Okay, casting a wide net.
A very wide net. Then they applied really strict criteria to narrow it down. They wanted to ensure each chosen index provided reliable, country-level data, that it came from reputable international organizations, had a clearly described methodology.
Makes sense. Needs to be credible.
Absolutely.
Right.
And crucially, that it complemented rather than overlapped with the other indices they chose. They didn't want to double count risks.
Right.
This rigor isn't just academic, it's what ensures the index is truly robust and gives its findings the weight they need for making those crucial decisions about our energy future. They also explain why some indices were included, maybe too much overlap, or focused on broader societal aspects less relevant to a country's specific capabilities, or just didn't cover enough countries.
Okay, that makes sense. A thorough filtering process.
Yeah.
So after all that meticulous sifting, what were the big dimensions that ultimately made up this risk index? What aspects of a country's stability or maybe instability did they really focus on?
Yeah, they landed on four key dimensions, and each one is measured by well-established existing indices.
Okay, what were the...
First up is resilience. For this, they use the Resilience Index from FM Global. This one measures a country's exposure to various risks, its capacity to sort of bounce back, and its potential to recover.
Resilience. That seems increasingly important.
It really is. And it's incredibly comprehensive. It factors in, I think, 18 different elements, things like control of corruption, education levels, energy infrastructure itself, greenhouse gas emissions, political risks, climate change exposure, even cybersecurity.
Wow, that's broad.
It is. And given the increasing effect of climate change on infrastructure, floods, storms, that kind of thing, resilience is becoming more and more vital.
Definitely. Okay, what's next?
Next is institutional quality. This dimension includes two key indices. First, the Corruption Perceptions Index from Transparency International that measures perceived public sector corruption on a 0-100 scale.
Familiar with that one.
Right. And second, the Rule of Law Index from the World Justice Project. That one assesses things like accountability, whether laws are just, how open the government is, and if justice is accessible and impartial, kind of the bedrock of a stable society.
Okay, so resilience, institutional quality.
Yeah.
What else?
Then there are conflicts. This is captured by the Global Peace Index, which comes from the Institute for Economics and Peace. This index measures the state of peace across 163 countries. It looks at indicators for societal safety and security, ongoing domestic and international conflict, and also militarization levels.
Right, the actual presence or absence of violence and tension.
Exactly. And finally, the fourth dimension is business conditions. For this, they drew on the Ease of Doing Business Index from the World Bank. This covers how the regulatory environment affects businesses, things like how easy is it to start a business, get electricity connected, trade goods across borders, practical stuff for trade.
Got it. Resilience, institutions, conflicts, and business. That seems like a pretty solid framework. But with so many data points from different sources, I imagine ensuring consistency and completeness was a challenge. How did the researchers handle that?
That's a critical point, and yeah, they took careful steps.
Yeah.
To avoid redundancy, like we mentioned, they excluded overlapping factors. For instance, the control of corruption factor was removed from the Resilience Index calculation because it was already well covered by the Corruption Perceptions Index. That prevents double counting the same risk.
Smart.
And for missing country data, which is always an issue with global data sets, they developed a pretty clever estimation method. They essentially found a strong relationship between a country's wealth, measured by GDP per capita, and its available index scores. They use what's called a logistic function to make reliable approximations for those missing values.
Ah, using wealth as a proxy to fill gaps.
Kind of, yeah, but in a statistically sophisticated way. There's a fascinating example with Qatar. Its high GDP initially led to a very high estimated rule of law score based on the general trend.
Okay. But the researchers recognize that Qatar's legal structures, while perhaps stable, differ significantly from many other wealthy nations. So they adjusted its score downwards by 21%, basing the adjustment on observed trends in similar Gulf countries. This ensured a more, let's say, realistic reflection of its actual GPR profile, rather than just following the raw statistical correlation blindly.
Interesting. So they applied some qualitative judgment based on regional context, too.
Exactly. It shows the level of care taken to make the index meaningful.
Okay, we understand how it's built, the dimensions, how they handled the data complexities. So what does this all mean when we put it all together? Which countries actually emerge as the most geopolitically reliable partners, and which ones present higher risks for future energy trade based on this index?
Right, the results. When you combine these indices, I think they used equal weighting in the main analysis for all 190 countries. A pretty clear picture emerges. Let's hear it.
The top performers, those with the lowest geopolitical risk, are consistently the European Nordic countries. Denmark scored 89 out of 100, Finland 86, Norway 85. Also right up there are Singapore, New Zealand, and Canada, along with many other European nations. They all scored 80 and above, reflecting extremely low GPR profiles. Very stable, reliable places.
Okay, no huge surprises there maybe, but good to see it quantified. What about the other end?
On the flip side, the bottom performers, indicating the highest geopolitical risk, include Venezuela, which had the lowest score in the study at just 32.3. Countries like Somalia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Yemen, and South Sudan also ranked very low. This is often, as you'd expect, due to ongoing violence and armed conflicts.
Right, places with significant instability.
Exactly. And what's interesting is a general trend they observed. Countries that score high in one parameter, say resilience, typically score high in others, like rule of law or peace. The Nordics, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, they really exemplify this.
So stability tends to be multifaceted.
Generally, yes. But there are exceptions, which are also interesting. The United States, for instance, ranks higher in resilience or ease of doing business, but it scores a bit lower on the peace index compared to some others at the very top.
Hmm.
And China, while ranking higher in peace or ease of doing business in this index, underperforms relatively in the corruption or rule of law dimensions. So you get these different national profiles.
Fascinating nuances. What about the overall distribution? Are most countries high risk, low risk, or somewhere in between?
Actually, the distribution shows that most nations, about 73% of them, fall in the moderate 50 to 70 range on that 100-point scale. And about half, 51%, are specifically clustered between 50 and 60. So a moderate GPR profile is the most common, but there are still significant variations across the globe.
Okay, this is really fascinating. But the real test is, how does this index translate into actual decisions about trading clean energy?
Yeah.
How did the study apply it to make sort of real-world recommendations or assessments?
Yeah, that's where it gets really practical. This study demonstrated its application by integrating this geopolitical risk index directly into a global e-fuel trading model. Specifically, they looked at E-Fischer-Tropsch liquids, or EFTL thinks synthetic jet fuel or diesel made with renewables in the year 2050.
Okay, a future clean fuel scenario.
Exactly. And what they did was assign each country a trading partner attractiveness score based purely on its GPR score from the index.
Right, so higher GPR score means more attractive.
Precisely. This attractiveness score then determined a weighting system in the trade model. If a country's GPR was above 80, very low risk, it received the highest weighting, prioritizing it as an attractive supplier.
Okay.
Scores between 60 and 79 got a neutral weighting, sort of moderate suppliers. Scores between 40 and 69 resulted in a lower weighting, reducing their potential export share in the model. And critically, countries with a GPR score below 40 were excluded entirely. They were deemed too risky, too unreliable to be considered as suppliers in the secure energy future scenario.
Wow, okay. So a direct impact on who gets to trade. What did that do to the results?
The impact on the potential trade partners was, well, dramatic.
How so?
In this scenario, without considering GPR, just looking at things like resource availability and production cost, Brazil emerged as the biggest potential e-fuel supplier. It accounted for about 34% of the total 3,290 terawatt-hours thermal traded globally in the model.
Okay, Brazil makes sense. Lots of renewable potential.
Right. But surprisingly, Yemen followed with 17%. Why? Because it has excellent solar resources and potentially very low production costs. Other significant shares came from various sub-Saharan African nations, Peru and China. That's a purely economic optimum.
Yemen at 17%. Wow. Okay, so what happened when they applied the GPR index?
The exporter portfolio shifted significantly. Yemen, with its low GPR score of just 37.7, fell below that 40 threshold. So it was eliminated entirely from the export picture. Gone.
Just like that.
Just like that. Brazil's share actually increased slightly to 37% because it's relatively stable compared to some others. And other countries with decent GPR scores like Namibia, Angola, Peru, Rwanda, and some other sub-Saharan African nations saw their potential export shares increase a bit to fill the gap left by Yemen and other high-risk potentials.
So it really reshuffles the deck based on stability, not just cost.
Absolutely. It highlights how purely economic decisions, just chasing the lowest cost, could have us building our future energy supply on what could literally be shifting sands, geopolitically speaking.
That's a powerful illustration.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so the inevitable question, though. What's the bottom line on cost? Does avoiding these risky partners mean significantly higher prices for our sustainable fuels down the line?
That's the crucial question, isn't it? And the answer from this study is actually quite encouraging. They looked at the global weighted average levelized cost of fuel, the LCOF.
Like the lifetime cost.
Exactly. Before any trading, the average cost was estimated at 82 euros per megawatt hour thermal. When they allowed trade without considering GPR, just pure economics, that cost dropped to 79 euro MWation, trade helps bring costs down.
Okay, expected.
But here's the key part. When they factored in the GPR index, excluding the riskiest partners, the average LCOF only increased slightly to 80 euro memel.
Only €1 higher, from 79 to 80.
That's right. The key insight here is that the total global import costs increased by only 1.7%. That works out to an annual difference of about 4.1 billion euros across the globe when incorporating GPR to avoid those high-risk partners.
Wow, 1.7%. That seems surprisingly small.
It is surprisingly small, and the small increase can, as the study puts it, significantly enhance security of supply by reducing reliance on less trustworthy trade partners. Think of it this way. For a remarkably modest premium, potentially just 1.7%, we could be insulating ourselves from immense future costs and disruptions if things go wrong in those unstable regions.
That really reframes it. It's not just a cost, it's like an insurance premium.
That's a great way to put it. A very small insurance premium against potentially massive geopolitical shocks. That's a powerful trade-off to consider.
And this isn't just, theories about a future e-fuel market, is it? What does recent history tell us about the true cost of ignoring geopolitical risks in energy?
Oh, absolutely not just theory. We only need to look at the European energy crisis of 2022-2023. What happened there? European countries had become heavily reliant on low-cost Russian natural gas.
Yep.
This was driven largely by short-term economic benefits, despite, frankly, long-standing and widely recognized geopolitical risks associated with that dependence.
The risks weren't exactly hidden.
Not at all. And after the invasion of Ukraine, this reliance led directly to soaring prices for natural gas and consequently electricity, causing immense economic and social costs right across the continent. Billions, trillions maybe, in indirect costs and economic damage.
Yeah, the impact was huge.
It vividly illustrates that the kind of marginal increase we saw in this study, that 1.7%, isn't really a cost in the grand scheme. It's a vital investment in long-term security and stability, paying a little more upfront to avoid catastrophic costs later.
That context makes the 1.7% figure seem even more compelling. Did the study connect this GPR index to other, maybe more familiar financial or country risk metrics?
Yes, they did. They looked for correlations with established metrics, which helps validate the index and understand how it fits in. They found a moderate correlation. The R-squared value was 0.43 between their GPR scores and central bank interest rates.
R-squared. Just remind us what that means.
Sure. An R-squared of 0.43 means that about 43% of the variation in central bank interest rates across countries could be statistically explained by the variation in their GPR scores. So there's a clear link, though not a perfect one. Generally, higher interest rates tend to correspond to lower GPR scores, which makes sense. More risk often means higher borrowing costs.
Yeah.
But they also noted exceptions. You might have, say, Iceland versus Bangladesh or Bolivia with similar interest rates but vastly different GPR scores. It shows the GPR index captures broader factors beyond just immediate financial risk priced by interest rates.
Interesting.
What else? Even more striking was the correlation with Moody's sovereign ratings, those credit ratings for countries. Here, the correlation was much stronger, with an R-squared value of 0.70.
70%. That's quite high.
It is. It means 70% of the variation in Moody's ratings can be statistically explained by the GPR scores. Both metrics are assessing aspects of country stability, right?
Right.
But they come at it from slightly different angles. Moody's focuses primarily on credit risk, things like economic strength, institutional strength, fiscal health, susceptibility to event risk. This study's GPR index, as we discussed, covers peace, corruption, climate vulnerability, business conditions, resilience. It's broader in some ways.
So they're not the same thing, but they're related.
Exactly. They should be seen as complementary tools. Both provide vital, though slightly different, lenses for investors, policymakers, anyone assessing a country's overall reliability and risk profile.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so stepping back, what does this all mean for us? For governments making policies, for investors deciding where to put their money, and just for the future trajectory of the global energy transition.
Yeah.
What's the wider impact of having a tool like this GPR index?
Well, the implications are really far-reaching, and they extend well beyond just the e-fuels example they used in the study.
How so?
Think about critical materials for the energy transition: lithium, cobalt, rare earths. Production is often highly concentrated in just a few countries. This GPR index is highly relevant for assessing the risks associated with relying on those specific sources.
Ah, right. The supply chain for the transition itself.
Exactly. It's also crucial for thinking about long-term fuel supply contracts, maybe for hydrogen or ammonia, and especially for major energy infrastructure planning. Things like pipelines, import-export terminals for hydrogen or CO2, these require huge capital investment upfront and have very long lifetimes, decades sometimes. You absolutely need stability and reliability from your partner countries for that kind of commitment.
You need to know your investment won't be stranded by instability.
Precisely. And we're actually seeing this kind of thinking play out in the real world already. Look at Germany, for example. They've been actively pursuing hydrogen partnerships, signing agreements with countries like Namibia.
Namibia came up earlier as having a decent GPR score.
It did. According to the study's index, Namibia ranks as the third most geopolitically stable country in sub-Saharan Africa. That choice wasn't random. It highlights this growing strategic importance of finding reliable, stable partners for these multi-decade energy projects.
The countries are already implicitly, or maybe explicitly, using this kind of risk assessment.
It seems so. And it's also important to remember that this relationship between geopolitics and energy, it's bidirectional. It goes both ways.
What do you mean?
Well, while geopolitics clearly impacts energy trade and security, the energy transition itself, shifting to renewables, building new trade relationships, can affect geopolitics too. Widespread adoption of renewable energy could foster greater interdependency and maybe even reduce geopolitical risks in some ways.
Interesting point.
But it could also introduce new risks, increased competition for those critical resources we mentioned, or new dependencies forming. It's complex.
So, for policymakers trying to navigate this, how can they use this index?
For policymakers, this quantitative GPR index provides a really tangible tool. They can formally integrate it into their energy security planning, into procurement guidelines for energy imports, and into strategic infrastructure planning. It allows them to systematically prioritize lower-risk countries and consciously diversify their suppliers away from potential hotspots.
Moving it from a vague concern to an actual metric in the decision process.
Exactly. And that directly addresses a critical gap that this study identified in a lot of the existing techno-economic literature on energy trade. Those models often focus heavily on cost and resource potential, but frequently overlook or only qualitatively mention these absolutely vital geopolitical risk factors. This provides a way to bake it right into the analysis.
And there you have it. Today, we've taken a deep dive into the research paper, Geopolitical Risk Index for Guiding International Sustainable Energy Trade. And I think we've discovered a really profound insight.
Yeah.
While building a sustainable energy future, investing that seemingly modest extra amount, maybe just 1.7% in the case of e-fuels, can potentially secure long-term stability, it comes from consciously choosing reliable partners over purely the lowest cost ones, using a tool like this index to guide those choices.
A small price for potentially huge benefits and security.
It really makes you consider, doesn't it? Our pursuit of a sustainable energy future isn't just about the technology we develop or the pure economics of production. It seems it's fundamentally about shaping new global relationships and maybe building trust. What will be the true cost of energy in a fully decarbonized world? If it's not just the financial number, what other costs are we factoring in, or maybe need to factor in?
That's a deep question. The cost of instability, the cost of insecurity.
Yeah, and this kind of strategic thinking, it goes far beyond just energy, right? It applies to critical resources, global supply chains, really every aspect of our interconnected world today.
Absolutely. The underlying principles are widely applicable.
Well, we hope this deep dive into Geopolitical Risk Index for Guiding International Sustainable Energy Trade has illuminated what seems like a vital new tool, one that could help us build a more resilient, more secure, and ultimately more sustainable future for all of us.